One of the most important principles in understanding human behavior is learning the difference between personality patterns and sexual orientation. These are not the same thing, and confusing them often leads to misunderstanding, unfair assumptions, and inaccurate conclusions about people. Narcissism refers to a pattern of thinking and behaving that is centered on self-importance, admiration, validation, and an excessive focus on how one is perceived by others. A person with narcissistic traits often craves attention, desires recognition, and may struggle to handle criticism. Their emotional world becomes heavily influenced by whether they feel admired, respected, or superior. These traits can appear in men and women, in different cultures, and among people with various beliefs and backgrounds. Sexual orientation, on the other hand, concerns who someone is romantically or sexually attracted to. It is a separate aspect of human experience and identity. The desire for admiration, the need to feel important, or the tendency to seek validation does not automatically indicate anything about a person's romantic orientation. Human beings naturally seek significance. Every person wants to feel valued. Every individual desires acceptance and recognition in some form. The problem begins when the need for significance becomes excessive and starts controlling a person's decisions and relationships. Narcissistic tendencies often develop around this intense desire for validation. A narcissistic man may spend tremendous energy trying to impress other men, outperform them, gain their approval, or receive recognition from them. He may become deeply concerned about how male colleagues, male friends, or male authority figures perceive him. He may seek their admiration and become emotionally affected by their praise or criticism. However, seeking admiration and seeking romance are two entirely different motivations. Consider an athlete who desperately wants respect from his coach. He may work harder than everyone else to gain that approval. Consider a businessman who constantly wants to be recognized by successful men in his industry. He may dedicate countless hours to earning their praise. Consider a son who spends years trying to gain the acceptance of his father. His emotional investment may be intense and long-lasting. None of these examples automatically indicate romantic attraction. They demonstrate the human need for validation, belonging, and significance. This distinction is important because human behavior is often more complicated than it appears on the surface. People pursue admiration for many reasons. Sometimes they seek it because they feel inadequate. Sometimes they pursue it because they want status. Sometimes they want reassurance that they are competent, respected, or valuable. Sometimes they are trying to heal old wounds created by rejection, criticism, or neglect. A person can become obsessed with approval without experiencing romantic attraction toward the people whose approval they seek. This is why wisdom requires us to avoid simplistic conclusions about complex human behaviors. People are motivated by many emotional needs. Some seek security, some seek acceptance, some seek power, some seek belonging. Others seek recognition because they have never learned to find confidence from within. One of the greatest mistakes in understanding people is assuming that one behavior explains everything about them. Human beings are multidimensional. An individual may be highly competitive, emotionally dependent on praise, and deeply concerned with social status, while their motivations remain completely unrelated to romantic orientation. Education teaches us to separate categories that should not be confused. Personality traits explain certain patterns of behavior. Emotional needs explain certain desires and insecurities. Romantic orientation addresses attraction. Each area represents a different part of human experience. Maturity requires careful observation rather than quick judgments. It requires the ability to ask deeper questions. What insecurity is driving this behavior? What unmet need is producing this response? Why does this person depend so heavily on approval? What experiences shaped their understanding of self-worth? These questions lead to understanding. Assumptions lead to misunderstanding. The deeper lesson is this: every human being needs an identity that is stronger than external validation. When people do not know their value, they often become dependent on admiration from others. They chase applause because they are uncertain about who they are. They seek recognition because they have not developed inner security. The answer is not to label people according to assumptions. The answer is to understand the difference between various aspects of human behavior and to recognize that lasting confidence comes from developing a healthy sense of identity and purpose. When people understand who they are and where their value comes from, they become less dependent on constant approval and more capable of living with clarity, balance, and emotional maturity. Human beings have an extraordinary desire to be seen, valued, and appreciated. This desire is not wrong. Every person wants to know that their existence matters and that their contributions have meaning. However, when this desire for recognition becomes excessive, it can develop into an unhealthy dependence on the opinions and attention of other people. This is often observed in individuals who display strong narcissistic tendencies. One interesting pattern that psychologists and behavioral experts have discussed is that some narcissistic men place enormous importance on the admiration and validation they receive from other men. This does not mean that every deep attachment or emotional investment is romantic in nature. Rather, it demonstrates the tremendous importance that external validation can have in shaping a person's sense of identity and worth. For many narcissistic individuals, the opinions of other men can become particularly significant because they associate masculinity, status, power, and achievement with how they are viewed by their male peers. A man who constantly seeks admiration may spend enormous amounts of energy trying to impress other men. He may want to be perceived as the smartest person in the room, the most successful entrepreneur, the strongest leader, or the individual who commands the most respect. His confidence may appear unshakable on the outside, but internally his sense of value may depend heavily upon receiving acknowledgement from others. Consider how much of society teaches men to compete. From childhood, many boys are encouraged to measure themselves according to performance, achievement, and social standing. They learn to compare themselves with other boys and later with other men. Success often becomes associated with proving superiority, earning respect, and winning approval. For a narcissistic person, this comparison can become all-consuming. Instead of finding satisfaction in personal growth and meaningful contribution, he becomes preoccupied with image management. He may continually ask himself questions that he never verbalizes. Who is more respected than I am? Who receives more attention? Who is considered more successful? Who threatens my position? Who can elevate my status? These concerns reveal something important. The individual is not necessarily pursuing authentic relationships. Instead, he may be pursuing validation. He needs confirmation that he matters, that he is important, and that he occupies a position of significance. The danger of living this way is that self-worth becomes unstable. If someone praises him, he feels powerful. If someone criticizes him, he feels threatened. If another person achieves success, he may experience envy or insecurity because his identity depends upon maintaining a superior image. This creates an exhausting cycle. The pursuit of admiration never ends because external validation cannot permanently satisfy internal insecurity. Praise feels good, but its effects are temporary. Recognition may provide a momentary sense of importance, but soon another achievement, another compliment, or another source of approval is needed. A person who constantly needs validation often becomes trapped in a performance-based identity. He feels compelled to demonstrate his importance repeatedly. He may seek opportunities to showcase accomplishments, emphasize status, or associate himself with influential individuals because these experiences reinforce his desired self-image. The deeper issue is not the desire for appreciation. The deeper issue is dependence. Whenever a person's identity rests entirely upon how others perceive him, he surrenders control of his emotional well-being to external circumstances. True confidence operates differently. Genuine confidence comes from knowing your values, understanding your purpose, and developing a sense of identity that does not collapse when approval is absent. A secure person appreciates recognition but does not require constant applause to feel valuable. One of the most liberating discoveries in life is realizing that your worth cannot be determined by comparisons. Your significance does not increase because someone admires you, nor does it decrease because someone overlooks you. Every human being possesses inherent dignity and value that cannot be measured by popularity, status, or public recognition. The pursuit of endless validation is like attempting to fill a container that has no bottom. No matter how much admiration enters, it eventually disappears, and the person searches desperately for more. Lasting security comes when individuals learn to derive their sense of worth from character, purpose, and personal responsibility, rather than from the changing opinions of others. The moment a person understands this principle, a remarkable transformation begins. He no longer lives to impress people. He no longer feels compelled to compete constantly for recognition. He becomes free to grow, to serve, and to pursue meaningful goals without being enslaved by the need for validation. That freedom is the foundation of emotional maturity and authentic confidence. One of the most misunderstood aspects of human behavior is the difference between admiration and emotional attachment. There are individuals who become intensely focused on earning the respect, approval, and recognition of other men. They may spend enormous amounts of time thinking about how they are perceived by male peers, competitors, authority figures, or successful men they admire. This intense focus can create emotional attachments that appear deeper than ordinary friendships. Yet these attachments are often rooted in psychological needs rather than romance. Human beings naturally desire acceptance and significance. Every person wants to feel valued. Every person wants to know that they matter. However, when someone has an unstable sense of identity, this need for validation becomes excessive. Instead of appreciating recognition, they begin to depend upon it. Instead of being confident in who they are, they become emotionally controlled by the opinions of others. For some narcissistic men, other men become important mirrors. They constantly look toward these mirrors to determine their own worth. If they receive praise, they feel powerful. If they are admired, they feel superior. If they are recognized, they temporarily feel secure. But if they are criticized, ignored, or surpassed by another man, they may experience intense frustration, jealousy, or even emotional collapse. This is because their sense of value has been placed into the hands of other people. When your self-worth depends on another person's approval, that person gains enormous emotional influence over your life. Their opinions begin to shape your mood, your confidence, and even your identity. You may celebrate when they notice you and become deeply distressed when they reject you. The relationship becomes emotionally charged because it is carrying the weight of your self-esteem. This is why some narcissistic men become preoccupied with male rivals or male authority figures. They may constantly compare themselves to them, compete with them, imitate them, or seek their validation. They may remember every compliment and every criticism. They may spend extraordinary energy trying to prove themselves. These behaviors can create relationships filled with admiration, envy, dependence, and emotional intensity. Yet emotional intensity should not automatically be interpreted as romantic attraction. Human beings can become emotionally attached to people who represent power, success, acceptance, or approval. A person may desperately seek another person's recognition because they believe that receiving it will somehow confirm their own value. The attachment is not necessarily about affection in a romantic sense. Often, it is about significance. Consider the person who spends years trying to earn the approval of a demanding father, a respected mentor, or a successful colleague. The emotional investment can become profound. They think about that person's opinions constantly. They become deeply affected by praise and criticism. Their entire emotional world can revolve around the relationship. Yet the driving force may simply be the need to feel worthy. The same principle can apply to narcissistic patterns. The pursuit of admiration frequently creates intense emotional bonds because admiration becomes a source of psychological survival. The individual begins to believe, consciously or unconsciously, that acceptance from certain people is necessary in order to feel complete. This dependence produces endless striving. The person continually seeks more praise, more attention, and more recognition because external validation can never permanently satisfy internal insecurity. It functions like drinking salt water. The more you consume it, the thirstier you become. This is why identity is so important. A person who understands their value does not become imprisoned by the opinions of others. They appreciate encouragement, but they do not depend upon it. They respect successful people, but they do not worship them. They enjoy recognition, but they do not build their identity upon applause. True maturity occurs when a person stops asking, "Who approves of me?" and starts asking, "Who am I, and what purpose have I been given?" Purpose stabilizes identity. It frees people from becoming emotionally dependent on the acceptance of others. The individual who knows their purpose can admire another person's strengths without becoming consumed by comparison. They can learn from mentors without surrendering their identity. They can respect authority figures without making their approval the foundation of their self-worth. The greatest freedom in life is to know your value so deeply that other people's opinions no longer define your existence. When your identity is rooted in purpose and character, you stop chasing mirrors. You stop needing constant confirmation. You stop becoming emotionally captive to admiration and recognition. You become secure because you understand something profound. Your worth cannot be given to you by another person, and therefore it cannot be taken away by another person. One of the most important lessons in understanding human behavior is learning the difference between admiration, emotional dependence, obsession, and romantic attraction. People often see intense emotions and immediately conclude that romance must be involved. However, human relationships are much more complicated than that. A person can become deeply attached to another individual for reasons that have nothing to do with romance. Some people become attached because they see in another person something they wish they possessed themselves. They admire confidence, success, influence, intelligence, physical strength, popularity, or social status. They become fascinated by the person because that individual represents an ideal they aspire to reach. The attachment may become intense because they believe that proximity to this person somehow increases their own sense of worth. This is especially important when discussing narcissistic patterns of behavior. Narcissistic individuals often struggle with an unstable sense of self-worth. Beneath the outward confidence, there is frequently a need for constant reinforcement. They look outside themselves for confirmation that they matter. They need admiration, recognition, and evidence that they are significant. As a result, they can become unusually focused on certain people who possess qualities they admire or envy. A narcissistic man, for example, may become highly preoccupied with the approval of another man whom he considers powerful, successful, or respected. He may constantly seek that person's attention, imitate his behavior, compete for his recognition, or feel devastated by his criticism. To outside observers, this emotional intensity may appear confusing, but emotional intensity alone does not reveal the nature of the attachment. Human beings become emotionally invested in many kinds of relationships. Athletes become deeply attached to coaches. Students become attached to mentors. Employees seek approval from supervisors. Young people often admire role models and dedicate tremendous energy to gaining their acceptance. In all these situations, powerful emotions can exist without any romantic motivation. Sometimes the attachment develops because the individual is searching for affirmation that was missing earlier in life. A person who never felt accepted may spend years trying to gain approval from authority figures. Someone who struggled with feelings of inadequacy may become consumed with proving themselves to successful peers. Another person may become obsessed with winning admiration because recognition temporarily quiets feelings of insecurity. The important lesson is this: emotional dependence should never automatically be interpreted as romantic attraction. Dependence often reveals need. It reveals insecurity. It reveals a desire for significance. It reveals an incomplete sense of identity. Obsession can also be misunderstood. A person may think about someone constantly, compare themselves to them, study their behavior, and even shape major life decisions around that individual. Yet obsession frequently originates from admiration, envy, competition, or unmet emotional needs rather than romance. In fact, competition itself can create powerful emotional reactions. People often become preoccupied with rivals. They think about them repeatedly. They monitor their achievements. Their successes and failures influence their own emotional state. These intense reactions demonstrate psychological investment, but they do not automatically indicate romantic feelings. This is why wisdom requires careful observation rather than quick conclusions. Human beings are multidimensional. Our emotions arise from numerous sources. We seek belonging, significance, identity, security, and validation. Sometimes these needs become entangled and create relationships that appear confusing from the outside. The deeper question is not whether someone feels intensely about another person. The deeper question is why the intensity exists. What need is being fulfilled? What insecurity is being soothed? What fear is being silenced? What longing is being expressed? When we ask these questions, we begin to understand people with greater wisdom and compassion. The real issue is not the presence of strong emotions. The issue is whether a person's identity has become dependent upon another person's approval. Whenever your sense of worth rises and falls according to someone's opinion, you have surrendered your emotional freedom. You have placed your value in the hands of another human being. No individual was designed to carry the responsibility of defining your worth. Your identity must be built upon principles, purpose, character, and self-understanding. Otherwise, you will spend your life chasing validation from people who can never permanently satisfy your need for significance. Strong emotions are part of being human. Admiration is human. Wanting approval is human. Looking up to others is human. Even becoming deeply invested in someone's opinion can happen to anyone. But wisdom teaches us not to confuse every intense attachment with romance. Human behavior is more complex than simple assumptions. The mature person learns to examine motives carefully, understand emotional needs honestly, and build an identity that does not depend upon the constant approval of others. That is where emotional freedom begins. That is where genuine confidence develops, and that is where a person finally stops living as a prisoner of interpretation and starts living with understanding, purpose, and inner security. Many people spend their entire lives trying to answer one question: am I enough? They ask this question in different ways. Some ask it through achievements, some through relationships, and others through the opinions of people around them. A person who is deeply insecure often develops an intense need to be seen, admired, and validated. The problem is not the desire to be appreciated. Every human being wants to feel valued. The problem begins when a person's entire sense of worth depends upon receiving constant approval from others. Insecurity is like an empty container that is never completely filled. You can pour compliments into it, and it still demands more. You can give praise, attention, and recognition, yet the hunger remains. The reason is simple. External approval can temporarily comfort insecurity, but it cannot heal it. It can provide a moment of satisfaction, but it cannot establish a permanent sense of identity. This is why some people become obsessed with status, influence, and recognition. They are not merely pursuing success, they are pursuing significance. They want evidence that they matter. They want proof that they are important. They believe that if enough people admire them, then perhaps they can finally feel secure within themselves. Unfortunately, this strategy never works for long. Every compliment eventually fades. Every achievement loses its excitement. Every round of applause comes to an end. Then the individual must search for another source of validation, because the previous one no longer produces the same emotional satisfaction. An insecure person often becomes highly sensitive to criticism. Even small comments can feel like major attacks, because criticism threatens the fragile image they have constructed. When identity depends entirely upon admiration, any challenge to that admiration feels like a threat to one's existence. The person may become defensive, angry, or deeply disturbed because their sense of worth is resting upon unstable foundations. True confidence operates differently. Confidence does not deny weaknesses, nor does it pretend to be perfect. Confidence is the result of understanding your value independent of changing circumstances. It is the ability to stand firm whether people applaud you or misunderstand you. It is the inner stability that comes from knowing who you are and why you exist. One of the greatest tragedies in life is to become addicted to approval. Approval can become a type of emotional currency. People begin making decisions not according to purpose, wisdom, or values, but according to what will bring them admiration. They speak to impress others. They work to impress others. They dress, compete, and perform for the acceptance of others. Eventually, they no longer know where their authentic self ends and their performance begins. Human beings were not designed to live as prisoners of public opinion. Every person possesses inherent value that exists before recognition and remains after criticism. Your worth is not created by applause. It is not established by titles, social status, or popularity. Those things may influence your opportunities, but they do not determine your value as a person. The individual who understands this principle experiences remarkable freedom. They can receive praise without becoming dependent upon it. They can experience criticism without being destroyed by it. They can succeed without becoming arrogant and fail without losing their identity. Their security comes from within rather than from circumstances around them. The pursuit of endless validation is exhausting because it requires continuous performance. You must constantly prove yourself, constantly defend your image, and constantly seek reassurance that you matter. Such a life becomes emotionally draining because the standard is never satisfied. Real transformation begins when a person recognizes that insecurity cannot be conquered by collecting more admiration. It is overcome by developing self-awareness, accepting imperfections, and building identity upon purpose and values rather than upon public opinion. When you know who you are, you no longer need every room to celebrate you. You no longer measure your value by comparisons. You stop chasing every opportunity to prove yourself because you realize your worth was never dependent upon other people's approval in the first place. The strongest person is not the one who receives the most applause. The strongest person is the one who remains secure even when the applause stops. That person has discovered a source of significance that no criticism can destroy and no amount of praise can improve. That is genuine confidence, and it is one of the greatest forms of freedom a human being can experience. One of the most dangerous ways to live is to allow your identity to depend entirely upon what other people think about you. A person whose self-worth is built on external validation becomes emotionally unstable because they have surrendered the control of their inner world to the opinions of others. The moment people praise them, they feel powerful. The moment people criticize them, they feel worthless. Their confidence rises and falls like waves because it has no solid foundation. This instability often appears in people who constantly seek attention, recognition, and admiration. They become experts at managing appearances because they fear what would happen if the applause stopped. They work tirelessly to maintain an image because they have never developed a secure sense of identity from within. Their value is determined by how many people admire them, agree with them, or speak positively about them. The problem with external validation is that it can never permanently satisfy the human heart. People are inconsistent. Their opinions change. The crowd that celebrates you today may criticize you tomorrow. The person who praises you this morning may ignore you next week. If your worth depends entirely on external approval, your emotional state will always be vulnerable to circumstances beyond your control. Many people spend years trying to become someone that others will applaud. They wear masks, they suppress their authentic thoughts, they pursue achievements for the sake of recognition rather than fulfillment. They compare themselves with others and constantly ask, am I better? Am I winning? Do people notice me? Yet even when they receive attention, the satisfaction is temporary. The need for more validation returns because external praise cannot heal internal insecurity. This is why identity becomes unstable when self-worth depends on validation from others. The individual does not know who they are apart from people's reactions to them. They become dependent on compliments, recognition, and approval to maintain a sense of value. In many ways, they become emotional prisoners because their peace is controlled by forces outside themselves. Real confidence is different. Genuine confidence does not deny the importance of encouragement or appreciation. Every person appreciates being respected and valued. The difference is that secure people do not require constant approval to believe in their worth. They appreciate recognition, but they are not enslaved by it. They can handle criticism because their identity is rooted in something deeper than public opinion. A person with a stable identity understands that value is not earned through applause. Human worth is inherent. You do not become valuable because people notice you. You do not lose value because someone rejects you. A diamond remains precious whether it lies in a display case or beneath the ground. Its value does not depend on who sees it. In the same way, your worth should not be determined by the number of people who validate you. This understanding produces emotional stability. Secure individuals are able to celebrate success without becoming arrogant and face failure without becoming hopeless. They are not constantly performing for an audience. They know who they are, and this knowledge gives them peace. Many people chase approval because they fear insignificance. They believe recognition will finally make them feel complete. However, completeness cannot be found in applause because applause is temporary. There will always be someone more admired, more successful, or more celebrated. If your worth depends on being superior in the eyes of others, you will spend your life in endless competition. The wiser path is to build your identity on principles, values, purpose, and character. Purpose gives direction that does not disappear when opinions change. Character provides stability that cannot be taken away by criticism. Values establish an internal compass that keeps you grounded even when external circumstances become difficult. The greatest freedom in life is to reach a point where your sense of worth is not controlled by the crowd. You can accept praise without becoming addicted to it and endure rejection without being destroyed by it. You no longer wake up asking, "Who approves of me today?" Instead, you ask, "Am I living according to my purpose? Am I becoming the person I was designed to be?" When a person reaches that level of maturity, identity becomes secure. Their confidence no longer depends on constant affirmation because they have discovered something more powerful than public approval. They have discovered the strength that comes from knowing who they are and understanding that their value exists independently of anyone else's opinion. That is where emotional stability begins, and that is where genuine freedom is found. One of the most liberating moments in a person's life is the moment they stop living for applause and begin living from purpose. Many people spend years trying to earn approval. They seek acceptance from family, friends, colleagues, and even strangers. They measure their value by how many people admire them, agree with them, or pay attention to them. But a person who depends entirely on external validation has handed over control of their emotional well-being to other people. The problem with living for approval is that approval is unpredictable. One day people praise you, and the next day they criticize you. One season they celebrate you, and the next season they ignore you. If your identity depends on the opinions of others, your emotional state will constantly rise and fall according to circumstances that you cannot control. This is particularly important when understanding narcissistic patterns. A person who has built an identity around admiration is never truly at rest. Their mind is occupied by questions such as, do they respect me? Do they admire me? Am I more successful than someone else? Am I receiving enough attention? They become exhausted because they are continually trying to maintain an image rather than develop genuine character. The human spirit was not designed to survive on applause. It was designed to function from purpose. Purpose gives stability because it is internal rather than external. It is not dependent upon public opinion. A person with purpose wakes up with direction, whether anyone notices them or not. They continue moving forward, even if they are misunderstood. They continue growing, even if nobody praises their efforts. Inner security comes from knowing that your worth is not negotiable. It is not something that other people have the authority to grant or remove. When you understand your purpose, you stop entering every room wondering who approves of you. You stop comparing your journey with everyone else's journey. You stop competing for attention because you recognize that your assignment in life is unique. This does not mean that encouragement and appreciation are unimportant. Every person enjoys being recognized. Every person appreciates love and affirmation. However, there is a difference between appreciating approval and becoming addicted to it. Appreciation says, "I am grateful for your encouragement." Addiction says, "I cannot feel valuable without your encouragement." Many people never experience peace because they are chasing a feeling that never lasts. They receive praise, and for a moment, they feel important. Then the feeling disappears, and they need another compliment, another achievement, another audience, and another source of admiration. It becomes a cycle that can never truly satisfy the deepest needs of the human heart. Purpose breaks this cycle. When you discover why you are here, you stop living as a prisoner of public opinion. You understand that your life carries responsibility and meaning that extend beyond impressing people. You begin investing your energy in growth, service, wisdom, and character development. Instead of asking, "Who notices me?" you begin asking, "How can I fulfill my purpose today?" A secure person is difficult to manipulate because their identity is rooted within. They are not devastated by criticism, nor intoxicated by praise. They listen to feedback, but they do not surrender their identity to it. They accept compliments, but they do not become dependent upon them. Their confidence comes from understanding who they are and where they are going. This kind of security creates healthy relationships. When you are secure within yourself, you do not need to control others to feel powerful. You do not need to dominate conversations to feel important. You do not need constant admiration to feel significant. You can celebrate other people's success because their achievements do not threaten your identity. You can love people genuinely because you are no longer using them merely as mirrors to reflect your importance. Real freedom begins when you realize that your value existed before anyone applauded you and remains intact even when nobody does. You are more than people's opinions, more than their recognition, and more than their acceptance. Your life has meaning that cannot be measured by attention or popularity. The person who knows their purpose walks with quiet confidence. They are not desperate to prove themselves because they understand themselves. They are not consumed by the need for validation because they have discovered something greater than approval. They have discovered inner security. And when a person is secure within, they become free to live with peace, clarity, and purpose, no longer controlled by the endless hunger for admiration, but guided by a deep understanding of who they are and what they were created to accomplish.